This work is the only thing that's keeping me from running screaming through the streets.
Oh, absolutely. You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward.
for inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up, and then later on the pod, we sit down with Greg Garrett, who's a professor at Baylor University. We talk about what is going on in the country after the first 100 days of the Trump administration. It is a great pod, so stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well, and you?
Have you ever heard the phrase, be careful what you pray for or be careful what you wish for?
I heard that a time or two growing up.
Okay. And, as of late, my mantra has kind of been the world's on fire and I'm sitting here with a spray bottle.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
I think, yes, I think God misunderstood my sentiment and sent enough water to put out 1,000
The
fires.
skies have opened up.
And then some. And I'm like, wait a minute, let me clarify. I don't think we're talking about the same thing. Apparently,
You got to pray specific, Missy. You got to pray specific.
God appears to be a little more literal than even I am right now. So yes, I would like to say I would like for the rain to stop because we to date this month have seen 12 inches, I believe, of rain.
Absolutely,
Which
yes.
brings me to another question.
Yes.
How many sump pumps did you ever think you would own in your adult life?
Oh, my goodness. So you have been tremendous, by the way. Thank you
Well,
for
duh.
doing the appropriate research. But yeah, you purchased 3 sump pumps while I went to Lowe's and bought 3 hose, 3 extension cords, and went outside last night in the middle of a deluge and put it all together.
Yeah.
And yes, 3.
Well, one that I got while you were out of
Right,
town
right,
had to
right.
do by myself. I
Yeah.
want props for that.
Yeah.
But fun fact, I was, 2 weeks ago, years old when I even learned what a sump pump was. And so now all the people with basements are like laughing at me. But, I've lived in the city, no basement ever. So I did not know what that meant or what that was. And so the funny thing was, is I was Googling, again, when you were gone and it was raining so hard, I was like, I've got to get this water out. I knew there was a mechanism by which to pump the water
I
out.
cannot wait. What did you Google?
Yeah, I know this. You know what?
I want to go back in your Google search history.
Yeah,
That's another episode.
this is I was gonna say it's a family podcast, but maybe sometimes we really dance on that line. So
Right.
no, I'm not going there. But yes, I was trying to figure out what to search to get a pump. So I was searching for pump, like at Lowe's or whatever on their website, and all I was getting were like decorative, water pumps for water features, and
Yeah.
I'm like, no, not like that. And so I kept these creatively, and I ended up just finally having to text my dad and be like, what is this called? I felt so dumb. And he's like, a sump pump? I'm like, oh yes, that's
Yes.
what it is.
Yes.
So once I put in the appropriate term, then I was, shown the appropriate things for what I needed. But I'm like, I do not need a bird bath fountain, dadgummit. I need to get this water out of my yard.
Yeah.
So it's been an adventure the last few days.
So anybody in the Oklahoma City metro area, if you are in need of a sump pump, we've got one.
Or
and
3.
we've got an extra that we can loan you.
Yes, we do have a few, and
Yeah.
I have become very adept at using
Yeah.
them.
So there's still a lot of fires out there.
I know. And unfortunately, the water in my backyard is doing nothing to help
It
them.
is not. No.
So, against my better judgment, I will ask you what fire you want to talk about today.
Well, there is one I really actually want to talk about. And as you know, last week, it was announced that there was a task force that was put together by the DOJ considering anti-Christian bias. Now, there's absolutely no definition of what that means. It seems as though the only definition is in the minds of those who are in power right now. But Attorney General Pam Bondi announced this task force. And this week, we're starting to kind of see the implementation of what this is going to look like, both in the DOJ and the State Department. And so there has been orders issued already asking employees of the DOJ and the State Department to begin to turn in other employees for anti-Christian biases. Again, no definition of what that is, but it is now policy that you can turn in a fellow employee for their anti-Christian bias. Now, here's what's really interesting. It's not just now, but it's also during the Biden administration. So if they saw anything during the Biden administration, they can turn a fellow employee in. And this is terrifying, to be quite honest with you.
You said task force, and I immediately like clicked back to my days in, church committees and church business meetings where it was decided, somebody wanted to kick the can down the road, so
Yeah.
you'd create a task force. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, this really isn't kicking the can down the road. It's kicking,
No, but
kicking your fellow employee in the teeth.
That's where my mind went. But yeah, that's very
Yeah.
scary because where's the line and who decides that? And also retroactively, like what's the time for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're hard at work, and then all of a sudden you're supposed to be, examining your fellow employees and seeing what kind of Christian bias they have. I mean, come on, really?
I mean, I'm all for tattling on fellow employees.
Oh, really?
I mean, but my list is a little bit different, I think.
Yeah.
Speaking of, peanut butter spoons in the sink are coming to mind at the moment. You know what? I could just make that into somehow anti-Christian. Ooh.
That I'm leaving peanut butter spoons in the sink.
Yes. Okay. I may be
Yeah.
all for this new task
Yeah,
force.
submit a form for that. And we'll see where it
I'm going to
goes.
submit a form.
But no, in all seriousness, who gets to define what these bias are? And that's very problematic because history has taught us that those in power get to define that.
Mhm.
And what does that mean for the rest of us who may disagree with those in power or may have a different interpretation of scripture or have a different faith? And, as a person who grew up Baptist and knows Baptist history, that's really problematic because Baptists early on in England and here in America were persecuted for their belief
Mhm.
by the federal government and local magistrates. And so that is really alarming that we are starting to take small steps back towards that time where there was some type of Christian supremacy and all others were below that, but nobody could define it besides those who are on top.
Well,
So,
then we just know that those lines usually get narrower and narrower until, eventually there's not very many people who are adhering.
right.
And it is very scary.
Yeah, it is very scary. And the frightening thing for me and for I hope our listeners and that our listeners can convey to others in their family and in their workplaces is that there is no end to this because you may say this day on this day I am safe,
Mm-hmm.
but there could be something down the road that you might disagree with, or you may have another conviction, or you may read scripture differently and say, hey, I've drawn another conclusion to this. And all of a sudden, that belief that you hold could be considered a bias towards the Christian supremacy that is ruling. And so it is a very frightening road to go down. But here we go.
Yeah, so that's really apropos to our conversation today.
Yeah, we visited with Greg Garrett this week, talking about the state of our country after the first 100 days of the Trump administration.
Yes, we had quite a long list that we wanted to talk to him about, and I
Yeah, we
think
did.
we got through like a small portion of it.
Right.
So you and I just became so captivated by what he was telling us that we had to kind of cut it off. But we're gonna have him back again. I think you said maybe after the second 100
right.
days.
100 days will seem like 100 years again.
That's right. That's
so-
right. There's no shortage of topics.
Right.
So we hope you enjoy our conversation with Greg Garrett.
We'll be right back.
For decades, the Festival of Homiletics has nurtured, challenged, and inspired thousands of preachers in their God-given calling. And this May, you can be part of the revival from the comfort of your own home. Live stream the sermons and lectures from our compelling speakers throughout the week, or watch the recordings at your leisure, and participate in dynamic community through our interactive platform. Please join us as we restore what has been depleted and nourish one another at the festival. Please visit www.festivalofhomiletics.com to reserve your spot today.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very special guest with us. Greg Garrett is an award-winning professor at Baylor University, where he is the Carol McDaniel Hanks Professor of Literature and Culture, one of America's leading voices on religion and culture. He is the author of more than 24 books. Greg's most recent book, The Gospel According to James Baldwin, What America's Great Prophet Can Teach Us About Life, Love, and Identity, is available wherever you purchase your reading material. Greg, welcome back to Good Faith Weekly.
Oh, Mitch, thank you so much. It is such a joy to see you and Missy and to talk with you today. We've got a lot of stuff to cover.
We certainly do.
So on that subject, Greg, a couple of weeks ago, you reached out to ask about popping back in with us to talk about the state of things these days. And so my first question is, why do you hate me and wish to see me cry?
No. We are all crying. Misery loves companies.
There you go.
And community is about what is it? The Ted Lasso thing. There ain't nothing worse than being sad alone.
That's right.
Right.
And if we can be sad together, I think that for people of faith to come together and have real conversation about what's going on in the country at this moment, and where we see what we understand about our faith being pushed to limits that don't make us comfortable, and beyond that.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for us to think about what our faith commitments call us to do. And so I really wanted to talk with you all about what I'm seeing, particularly around the issues of whose history gets taught in this country, what's happening with universities, what's happening with freedom of speech, and why all of that matters to me from my standpoint as a Christian theologian.
So that brings me to my next question. In your email, you said something that struck me. You said, so much has changed since we talked a year ago. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to go back and listen to that interview from a year ago. And I did. And I want to bring up this statement that you made in the interview. You said, I'm going to continue to work inside this system as long as it feels like progress can be made in it. But I can also see the case for saying we have screwed this up so badly that it would be better just to burn this house down and rebuild it. So my second question for you is, are you bringing the matches or am I?
I know. And that honestly sounds like something that could be said by a person in a red hat.
Right.
And so, like the standpoint and the heart from which that's emerging makes a whole lot of difference. When the three of us talked last time, we were talking about my book on James Baldwin.
Right.
So it's a year ago. The election hadn't happened yet. And, I was at that moment, I think, at kind of a low point in my hopefulness around the election. I got into a ridiculously hopeful spot at one point, and then, seesawed back in the other direction. So one of the things that I think that I was talking about there, and Missy, if I've got the context wrong, you can let me know. But I think, thinking about the ways that our Christian faith is getting used in this culture and particularly in this government.
Right.
And so in the course of a week, we have seen this administration, leaning heavily into the idea that they're going to create a sort of federal government, not agency, but, initiative to protect Christianity.
Right.
And then a couple of days later, they're arresting some of our most prominent Christian anti-poverty leaders on the steps of the Capitol.
Yep.
So I think one of the things that I hope what I meant by that, as opposed to just a statement of general anarchy, was that what has to happen is we've got to call the American church back to its actual faith commitments,
Right.
and to pull it away from this push for power and privilege, and this sort of Pharisaical posturing in the public square, and to come back to and you guys may have seen this, but lately on social media, I've been talking more and more about myself in the way that Raphael Warnock speaks of himself as a Matthew 25 Christian. And I know that's not at all alien to you. It's a new formulation for me to kind of think of like a t-shirt,
Right.
or a hat.
Yeah.
That because that seems to be how we do things these days.
Right.
So, to be a Matthew 25 Christian means that it's not about, public expressions of faith. It's not crying, Lord, Lord. It's about what have we done for the marginalized, for the prisoner, for the hungry, for the orphan and the widow, for those people on the margins that Jesus called the least of these. And I think the thing that has me so exercised in reaching out to folks like you is I still, like James Baldwin did, believe that people can do better.
Right.
Mhm.
And I still want to believe that our brothers and sisters in Christ who have, put on the hat,
Mm-hmm.
drank the Kool-Aid,
Mm-hmm.
that spirit can still work. I mean, we believe that.
Right.
I'm teaching Harry Potter this semester, and we're in book 7.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the novelist J.K. Rowling, as opposed to the Twitter personality J.K. Rowling,
Sure.
Mhm.
but one of the things that the novelist J.K. Rowling believed is what we believe, that there is no person outside the realm of redemption. No
Mm-hmm.
matter what choices you've done, no matter what you've, broken, no matter if you're Lord Voldemort,
Yeah.
you can still repent and you can still make things right. And so I think my long-winded coming into the station kind of response is, if Americans can be called back to what Lincoln called the better angels of our nature, or what we understand in a biblical sense actual Christianity is about, as opposed to yoking our wagon with power and privilege,
Mm-hmm.
then I think it's still possible that something can happen. But if American Christianity is done, if the 80% or however many percent, it's not that much. You guys have talked with Robbie Jones,
Mhm.
so it just seems like a lot.
Yeah. Well, they're certainly the loudest.
They are
Right.
certainly the loudest.
Yeah.
So now here we are. We have survived 100 days of this administration,
100 days.
or 100 years. I'm not sure which it is. I guess in general, before we get into talking about some of those specific areas that we're going to address, are you feeling like, I mean, I'm not even going to say either or, are you feeling like I am, where it was just kind of worse than expected?
I mean, the sad, happy thing about my life is that I know a lot of terrible things. When you study white Christian nationalism, and when you study racism, and when you study like the interface of Christians and politics in America, there are not many, like, dark undersellers you're not at least a tiny bit familiar with.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I do kind of feel like they opened some trap doors that I was not aware of.
That's a great way of looking at it.
Mhm.
Yes.
And so, what I think I can say is, even though they've had 4 years and a set of conservative intellectuals working on a white Christian nationalist program, I I expected terrible things to happen, but I didn't expect like 25 terrible things to happen every single day.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where I am. And I don't know if this is useful advice for people, but like the first week or two of this administration, I was so overwhelmed.
Mhm.
I was like, oh, that's on fire, and that's on fire, and that's on fire, and that's on fire. And I had some valuable sort of mentor advice where somebody said, stay in your lane.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Okay, my lane is not tariffs. My lane is diversity and race and how we understand the least of these. And to kind of step out that and try to put out all of those fires is to put out no fires. And not to have any influence, on the one fire that's right in front of me, and I have a blanket,
Mhm.
Mhm.
ready.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest thing that I would say about this first 100 days is, first, it's been awful. And I told my department chair, this is not a thing you should say at your annual review, but I actually did. I said, this work is the only thing that's keeping me from running screaming through the streets.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And so I think if you are feeling that, it's absolutely okay. We are meant to be feeling that. Is whole part of their strategy.
Mm-hmm.
But don't lose sight
Yeah.
of what's important. And again, to take my mentor's advice, don't lose sight of the place where you have some influence and where you have a voice.
Yeah. Well said. So let's talk about some of these trapdoors, Greg. Let's focus on the administration's attacks on DEI and wokeness, as they quote, try to describe it. The president declared recently, my administration has taken action to abolish all discriminatory diversity, equity, and inclusion nonsense. And these are policies that were absolute nonsense throughout the government and the private sector.
So, Greg, what's behind this obsession with DEI, and what are the results that you are seeing in your position as a university professor?
All right. So remind me if I forget the second part of this, because I tend in class to ask like 7 questions when, when they didn't, all get answered.
Right.
The first and most important thing is that this is classic white Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
And you know this from the conversations that you've had, but like my expertise in this, sadly, is both personal and professional. I come from, I grew up in the rural South, and then my family lived in rural Oklahoma. I went to Mustang High School outside of Oklahoma City at a time that there wasn't a single black or brown family in our town.
Mhm.
So one of the things that happens, and Ibram Kendi talks about this, the idea that racial tolerance and diversity tolerance is a pendulum.
Mhm.
And so what happens is, all right, we elect a black president, and then we elect the most racist white president
Mhm.
of our lifetimes. And there is this degree of discomfort that people feel culturally, politically, religiously, and in every sphere of their life. And many of these people are not terrible people. So like I will not identify the family member I'm about to speak of. But I was speaking to this family member who, even knowing everything that I do, and like what my 24/7 life is in church
Mhm.
and at school and
Mhm.
on the page, she said, "I am so tired of seeing black people on television."
Wow.
Ooh.
I know. And so after we had negotiated that, what became clear to me was that for people of a certain age and people with a certain cultural understanding, white people should be ascendant. When I look at the TV, I want to see people who look like me, not people who don't look like me.
Mhm.
Mhm.
When I walk out in public, I want to see people who look like me. When I look into the cockpit of the airplane, I want to see people who look like me.
Mhm.
And it is all part of this like multifaceted discomfort around the way that America is changing.
Mhm.
Now, I think the three of us would agree that America is changing for the better because of this diversity.
Mhm.
And many of the interviews that I did for my upcoming book and that I've done for my ongoing series for Baptist News have been affirming diversity. So, like one of the most important, I don't know if you guys have talked with Ty Seidule,
Mhm.
the general of the Army who was head of the history department at West Point.
Right.
So he wrote a great book, Robert E. Lee and Me,
Okay.
Mhm.
which is a really great book about growing up in the South, as I did.
Mhm.
But one of the things that happened in terms of our conversation, he had just spoken in front of a House committee on how the power of the US military is its diversity.
Mhm.
And then we have a president who appoints a secretary of defense who believes that the power of the military is to take a bunch of white bros and put them in positions of authority.
Mhm.
And so, we lose not only the incredible diversity of experience and wisdom and knowledge, and just cast that out, but we also affirm a really narrow kind of understanding of the world
Mhm.
when we get rid of diversity. And so, one of the things that I am most excited about in my life as a Baylor professor is that Baylor, as a university, has affirmed that we are better
Yeah.
when we are more diverse.
Mm.
And because we're not a public university, we can still pay attention to things like that. And so when I look around my classroom, like I'm teaching Harry Potter and James Baldwin this semester. If my class were only made up of people who look like me, it would be not only deadly dull, but we wouldn't be learning
Mhm.
Right.
anything.
Yeah.
Right. I
For
can.
me, the most important thing about diversity is I know what I know and I don't know what I don't know.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And only you can tell me what I don't know. I have tried to expand my circle of friends and professional acquaintances as widely as I can, cast as wide a net as I can, because my own experience, and I'm guessing yours as well, I mean, you work with Starlet,
Mhm.
who's like
Right.
this amazing
Right.
writer and theologian. Um, and like, I know my life would be impoverished if I had not had conversation with her.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So that for me is the biggest thing. It is scared white people, many of them of a certain age.
Mhm.
And Tim Alberta, in
Oh
his
yeah.
book, and I I forget which New York Times columnist he was quoting, and it may come back to me, and if it does, I will just blurt it out. This New York Times columnist wrote, and I think he's right, these are the death throes of a dying animal.
Hmm.
Mm.
But when Robbie Jones and I did a program in Dallas last year, it came to me that, like, if you stepped on a scorpion, it may take the scorpion a minute or two to die, but he can still do plenty of damage
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
before he goes. And someone who's been stung by a scorpion recently.
Uh,
So let's talk a little bit about, a subject even near and dear to your heart, which is higher education. As we all know, I mean, so much money in research funding has been either taken back or refused, and the administration is demanding that universities and colleges conform to their policies or face consequences. We're all hearing about what's going on at Harvard University. What are the implications for you personally? Speak to what you're worried about for the educational institution at large.
Okay. Yeah. So I will start with Baylor. And I'm sure the vice president for communications would want me to remind people that I do not speak for Baylor.
right.
Right.
Right. Right.
I'm a senior faculty member at Baylor, but I don't promote the message. I'm just this is my observation from my position. And then I think I want to talk to higher education, but I also want to talk to education more broadly
Hmm.
for the second part of your question. So at Baylor, we are a private Christian research university, and all of those descriptors are important. When the administration reached out to Georgetown Law School a month or so ago, you guys may have seen it.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
They basically said, unless you stop doing all this diversity stuff, I can promise you that the Justice Department is not going to hire any of your law school graduates. And Georgetown, like Harvard, and to their credit, said, go pound sand.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
We are a private Christian university. It is an abrogation of our First Amendment rights. It's an abrogation of our rights of religious freedom, to tell us what sort of subject matter we should pursue and how we should pursue it. And so I am guessing that similar conversations are taking place around Baylor at levels above mine. But the things that I am observing, so I'm a senior faculty member. This is my 35th year at Baylor. And I've got, I'm the longest lived person in my department. Is how I start to think about it now. And not the longest lived faculty person on
That's a
campus. But
clever descriptor.
I have seen things come and go. But what I am seeing is that with the Research One designation that we achieved,
Hmm.
which is, we're bringing in external funding, foundation funding, federal government, state funding. Um, One of the things that is the hallmark of the American higher education system is that higher education takes on research projects that private business doesn't. They take on scientific questions. They look at questions in the humanities and in other disciplines that don't have an immediate payback.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're running a business and you're laying out money for R&D, you're like, what's our outcome?
Hmm.
Is this a faster charging battery? Is this a faster microchip? And a lot of times the research that's done in colleges and universities is what we call pure research. Like, we don't know where this is going to lead. I mean, it might lead to a new injectable drug for people who wrestle with their weight,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
which is actually a thing that happened out of college and university research.
Right.
Not knowing it's going to be, hey, this is going to be a drug that's going to be the best selling drug in the world, but just knowing, hey, wouldn't it be interesting to explore this question and see where it leads us? So part of the economics at colleges and universities, particularly those with a research component, is that we grow to rely on that money as a way of not just providing the research component, but providing research opportunities for our students. From a Baylor standpoint, I can tell you that even though we're not Harvard, um, we receive a ton of money from the federal government to support the research that we do that benefits society. And if the government doesn't like the way we do diversity or doesn't like the way we teach history, or whatever reason they come up with, today or tomorrow,
Hmm.
it is going to have a substantial effect on my university, but it's also going to have a substantial effect on every university.
Right.
So I have grad students who have had their graduate admissions rescinded because people are reducing the size of their classes.
Mhm.
And I mean, like, don't even get me started on what's going on in the economy because that's not my lane.
Yeah.
Have all of these seniors in my classes this semester that are justifiably freaking out.
Right.
Like, they are honors graduates, they are top of their classes, and they don't have job offers yet
Mhm.
because nobody in the private sector knows what's
What's
going to happen.
happening?
So
Right.
I'm in the education sector. All I know is that this is a result that I'm seeing based on the chaos and one of those trapdoors that's not my trapdoor.
Yeah.
So the point that you made early on, I mean, all of this is obviously very scary, but the point that you made early on, which I think can drive home for everyone, you may not be a professor or student looking for a job, but for everyone can understand the difference between a researcher in a university setting and a researcher at, I don't know, some major corporation.
Yeah,
The motivators are different. Like you said, your companies, your businesses, they're in their research to make a profit. And no
yeah,
matter what you say, that's going to affect what they choose to research, number one, and then how they, to some degree go about that. I'm not saying that nothing good ever comes of that. However, when you're in that educational setting, like you said, the research is for answers for knowledge sake to really see what is out there available, especially like you said, in medical treatments and things like that. I think that's a really, really great point to remember as we're going to the polls, shall I say?
it's a really tangible way that education has an effect on America. Many of these trapdoors that are opening, things are falling down them that we'll never recover.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, whether it's, a 20-year longitudinal study
Hmm.
that was taking place at a college, and those results are going to be lost and they're not going to be able to be replicated.
Right.
You know, everything that we are losing at this moment, and that I think is part of why I went like into the fetal position for the first week or two.
Mm-hmm.
I was just like, oh, all the trapdoors,
Right. Right.
all the trapdoors.
And it's been a tough week just for education in general. I mean, just this week, a case that I am involved in here in Oklahoma with the public funding of a private charter school, St. Isidore
Yep.
Charter School. Arguments were made this last Wednesday regarding that particular issue. And by the questions that we are hearing coming out of the court, it seems as though the conservative judges or justices on the court are open to funding offering public dollars to these private education, and that is just going to destroy public education, as you said a moment ago. If we lose some of these institutions, we're probably never going to get them back. And I would say that's the case with public education. If we lose public education, if we lose our library system, they're never coming back ever. And
Yeah.
who's going to be the greatest victims of all of this? Many people who supported this administration, rural
Many of
communities.
the people on the margins.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you guys have talked with James Tallarico
Yes.
from
Yes.
Texas,
Hmm.
but he and I talked a couple of weeks ago, and he probably said something similar to you about the Texas, um, bill to fund private religious institutions. And we wanted to try and make sure that we center this around our Christian values.
Hmm.
And I don't know of many people that are better at this than James Tallarico.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But what he said to me, and he probably said something similar to you, was there is nothing more unchristian than stealing from the poor to give to the rich.
Yeah.
So if, I would love to put everything we talked about today back in that, kind of Matthew 25
Sure.
filter. It's not the billionaires that are going to be damaged
Hmm.
by this or by any of the trapdoors that are opening. They've got helicopters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I mean that both physically and metaphorically,
Right. Right.
right?
Yeah.
So if you're a billionaire or if you're a wealthy person, you are insulated from many of the terrible things that are going to happen to people like you and me. My daughters are in public school.
Mhm.
If public school fails, then what do we do?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I also like that you were talking about libraries because that's one of the big things that I've been thinking about and have been thinking about for several years.
Mhm.
Because here in Texas, for the past several years, there have been attacks on public libraries, and in Texas and Florida, and possibly in Oklahoma, because
Oh,
I have been following what's going on with your public
we
education.
yeah, we get contacted by librarians in the state of Oklahoma on a routine basis, and many of
Yeah.
them are looking to, change vocations because threats that they are receiving based upon books that are on the shelf. And just, I mean, just the loads and loads of bureaucracy that is being put upon them and the scrutiny that's being put upon them. I mean, it is really, really terrifying now to be a librarian. Now, let that sink in, Greg. It is dangerous to be a librarian these
Be
days.
a librarian. So this, I mean, and this comes back to the anti-diversity initiatives
Yeah.
we were talking about earlier. And it also comes back to the historical stuff that I'm trusting we're going to talk about in some fashion. Missy, I think you saw that I posted that the monument to enslaved people is going
Hmm.
up on the Baylor campus.
Hmm.
And one of the comments was, watch out for the MAGA people. When the MAGA people find out about this, that
Hmm.
you're telling the truth about Baylor's history,
Hmm.
they're going to come and want to tear it down.
Right.
And that's essentially what's happening with the libraries, the public schools, and with all this controversy around DEI and around the teaching of history. And so when we talked about Baldwin last time I was on, I hope that one of the things we talked about was his insistence that Americans need to reckon with their history.
Hmm.
And I think a place where all of this comes together, because I was actually looking at the executive order that Mr. Trump issued last week about history and about the Smithsonian, where he condemned the uh, Museum of African American History and Culture
Hmm.
for spreading. And forgive me, I'm going to pull this up because this is wording that gets used over and over again. A concerted and widespread effort to rewrite our nation's history, replacing objective facts with a distorted narrative driven by ideology.
Hmm.
And we were talking. I used the phrase earlier, just like pure white Christian nationalism.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It goes back to pulling books from the library shelves. Um, you probably know that Robbie Jones and several other folks, like 100 other books, were pulled
Yeah.
from
Hmm.
the U.S. Naval Academy.
Hmm.
All of them around race and gender and sexuality stuff. And it all goes back to the earlier stuff that was, legislation passed in Florida and in Texas, and probably also in Texas, which is where let's not teach history that
Right.
offends people.
Yeah. And it's a reconstruction of history, Greg. I mean, that's what we're finding here in Oklahoma. I mean, just this week, and our state superintendent, and we will not speak his name publicly.
Please don't. I will say Baldwin all day.
But there has been an approval of a new social studies curriculum here in the state of Oklahoma that questions the 2020 election, that rewrites what happened on January 6th. And, it's a continuation of this whitewashing of history, but it's even more than whitewashing of history. It is actually a reconstruction of history because now
Yeah.
you know what one of the approved curriculum components are in the state of Oklahoma?
Oh, tell me.
Curriculum straight from PragerU that talks about how the Europeans came over here and saved the indigenous people, and that slaves didn't really have it that bad here in the Americas. It is,
Yeah.
I mean, it is right out of you, as you just said, this pure white Christian nationalism that is terrifying. They are setting the stage for this supremacy that they are trying to enact upon all of us.
Yeah. First, thank you so much for having me on to talk about this,
Hmm.
because I think it is incumbent on people who look like us
Mhm.
to push this out into the stratosphere, into the larger world. Um, so many of my friends who are people of color are either terrified or exhausted.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And the other thing that I've discovered over the last many years of doing this work in white churches is that often white people don't want to listen to black people or brown people or Asian people.
Right.
You know, um, I always say that this is my secret weapon. You know, increasingly portly, you know, really, aging out, white,
How did
middle
you call it?
class,
Longer
great,
lived?
liberal. And, so when I go in and talk to clergy in Mississippi, they are going to receive me differently. And I'm not saying that's a good thing, but they're going to receive me differently
Right.
than some of my friends who are Black liberation theologians.
Right.
Mhm.
And so I think one of the things that is really essential is that for those of us who have privilege, and who at least putatively would benefit from white Christian nationalism, to say there's nothing Christian about this.
Hmm.
And, in terms of, when I pull my sort of modifiers together, I'm Christian first, after that I'm a father, I'm a husband. It's a ways down before I get to American.
Hmm.
But for a number of years, what I've been arguing, and I've actually wrote about this back in the 2012 general election, that so many Americans received their primary identification from their partisan politics, from that identification, and not from their religious or wisdom affiliation.
Hmm.
And I mean, we've never seen it more clearly. But one of the things that I think is really important, like Mitch, going to your point, is if these lies get repeated over and over and over and over and over again, some people start to believe them.
Right.
You know, there are people who watched January 6th take place and were horrified by them. And again, I was speaking with a family member and saying, you stopped liking Trump because of January 6th. And this person said, well, I think I was wrong about what happened that day. Who are you going to believe, Mr. Trump or your own
Or your own
eyes?
eyes. Yeah.
So when we come back to history, there are two things that I think are really essential here. And this is whether we're talking libraries or public school or just civic education. Um, there is at the Museum of African American History at the Smithsonian this long back wall where all of it rises like 5 stories, and you kind of come up from slavery and come towards some hope.
Hmm.
But there's a quotation from Baldwin on the back wall that talks about the importance of our understanding and accepting our history. And it's a thing that he said over and over again across 30 or 40 years of writing. And I came back, after I'd posted something about how excited I was to talk to you guys today, I kind of went back and revisited that.
Yeah.
And, what Baldwin says is if we don't deal with our own history, then none of us can move forward.
Hmm.
But the thing that for people who look like you and me is important is he says, if we don't deal with our history, if white people don't deal with the damage they've done and the damage that damage has done to them, then they are as much in chains
Hmm.
as any enslaved person in the Mississippi Delta
Yeah.
ever was.
Yeah.
And, so I was thinking about Jesus saying, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. What's coming out of this white Christian nationalism and out of this historical revisionism is, and I do not use this word often,
Hmm.
satanic.
Mm.
It is, I mean, demonic in the
Yeah.
sense that I understand demonic.
Right.
It is intended to separate us from ourselves, from each other, from God, from our highest possible beings.
Hmm.
So I think of sin the same sort of way that Paul Tillich talked about it. And I grew up in a very Southern Baptist tradition. And now I'm kind of at this place where it feels to me like sin is whatever separates us from the things that are most important. And this teaching of alternate history separates us from the responsibility that we have to repent and repair
Hmm.
all of these relationships that have been damaged over 400 years.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Greg Garrett, there's so many other topics that we wanted to get to. So how about this? We're only 100 days in. There's going to be another 100 days. How about you come back in day 200 and we talk about what happened in this next 100 days? But you
Yes.
are always welcome back to Good Faith Weekly, my friend. But before we let you go, we always got one last question for our guest, and Missy gets to ask it.
Before I do, I'm going to circle back to something I
Oh,
had in my
okay.
notes, because when I ask your question, I'm going to ask you to answer it with this in mind. People who've listened to our podcast regularly know that kind of my mantra these days is the world's on fire and I'm standing over here with a spray bottle. That's kind of what it feels like. So I want to ask you, maybe, of course, to offer some hope or some direction. Like, I think I love what you said about staying in our, finding a lane. And I think that's a really great thing to remember when we're looking at all of the fires. Where can our little spray bottle work? and where do we need to go and to do that. So I appreciate those words. I apologize. I know Mitch and I just sat here and listened to you like you were lecturing in a college class. 'Cause
That's right. I hope I get credit for this.
I know we were so
Yeah,
so
it's like,
interested. And so yes, I said it last time and I'll say it again. Someday I am sneaking into your class. And I'm just gonna sit in the back.
you
Listen.
guys would be welcome anytime.
So, Professor, with all of that said, as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So, in light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
The way that I kind of do this question when I am interviewing people is I ask, "What's bringing you hope and courage?"
Mhm.
Right.
And so in your, what's next question and your context, the world is on fire. Um, so what's next for me? And I'll start with that, and then I want to talk about maybe what's next for all of us,
Mhm.
just in terms of any wisdom that I can offer. I've spent 8 or 10 years working on racist mythologies. And so I have done this incredibly deep dive on what our friends in the White House would call alternative history.
Mhm.
And if you know a single black or brown person, is simply history and their everyday experience.
Mm-hmm.
I have a book coming out from Oxford University Press next spring.
Oh, good.
And it is the biggest book I've ever written in a multitude of ways. It's 150,000 words, over twice as long as the Baldwin book we talked about last time. 660 footnotes.
Wow.
I don't want anybody coming back to me and saying, "Oh, you just made some stuff up."
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I want to say is, what's next is we've got to continue injecting facts into a conversation where the White House wants to lie.
Mm.
And they want to lie repeatedly over and over again, trusting that we will get exhausted in trying to tell the truth. So I hope my book will be a part of that. That book is coming in spring of 2026, and the working title of it is White Lies.
Wow. Okay. Can't wait for that.
10 racist myths that are destroying America. So know the truth, say the facts. And then I think finally we got to seek faithful community.
Yeah.
I have recently gone back to the church where I came back to faith, the historically African American church in East Austin that I may have told you about.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized that I needed to be in a space where I was surrounded by people who understood that faith without justice is meaningless.
Mm-hmm.
And I also needed to be around my brothers and sisters of color who can't speak out in the same way I can, and remind myself, like, day on day, even if I can get away with not speaking, I can't not speak because of the love that I have for them.
Greg Garrett, once again, thank you so much for joining us this week on Good Faith Weekly. You're welcome back anytime, my friend, and we will see you down the road. Thanks for your wisdom and inspiration today.
Thanks, you guys. Thank you so much.
Okay, so one of the things that I really had to stifle laughter at a comment that Greg made, not at Greg, but at what he said, when he was talking about, white supremacy, and that how it just by nature wants everything to look the same. You want your barber to look like you. You want your pastor to look like you.
Right.
Or he didn't say those two, but the one he said you want your pilot to look like
Right,
you.
yeah.
And I'm like, that's great. We have elected a pilot that looks just like us, but you know what? He doesn't know how to fly the plane, y'all. It just was like,
He has no clue how to fly this plane.
it made me laugh. I don't know. It just made me chuckle inside. I'm like, you keep going. You keep putting people in power that look exactly like you. And let's
Right.
see. I mean, we are seeing how that's
Yeah,
going,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But the more I kind of hear that mantra about the desired homogeneity.
Yeah.
Homogeneity.
Yeah, that's very good.
Excellent. New word for me. And just the desire that we do settle into, if we're not careful, of wanting everything to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
Because for some reason that's just a comfortable place.
Yeah.
And but how dull and how boring that is. I don't know. It was just something that kind of struck me funny on the one hand, but also incredibly tragic, is that, what we end up with when we try to shut others out, or when we try to create this very monotone, this very sameness in our culture, in our neighborhoods, or in our schools or workplaces or whatever. What we're missing out on, number one, in terms of the richness of the experience, and also just the absolute incompetence that ends up
Yeah.
occurring.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, this whole idea of sameness is really contradictory to the gospel. I mean, we look at Jesus and his words, and he was all about diversity. He was all about inclusion. He was, his ministry was an outreach to people who worshiped differently than him, who thought differently than him, who grew up in different cultures. And that's who he was. That was his message. It was about God's love is so big that it wraps all of us together and brings more of us together to God's table. And that's the beauty of the gospel. And that is why it's so frustrating right now when we hear about things such as the anti-Christian bias task force or these attacks on DEI at universities that Greg talked about, that for some of us, task force such as the anti-Christian bias is anti-Christian, Missy. Because the gospel itself is inclusive. The gospel itself is diverse. And so we as a people of faith, that should be central to who we are. We should be looking to nurture and foster these relationships out of our sameness so that we can celebrate our humanity and who we are as the people that God created us to be. And so that's where my growing frustration is. And that's my hope as well, that we can get to a point where, we are welcoming of the stranger, as Jesus said, no matter who that stranger might be.
And we say it all the time. You should always be building a bigger table. You should always be welcoming more.
Yeah.
And that just, it enriches our lives. And it does what we're supposed to do.
Exactly. It's not that hard.
Sorry, that was real hard to leave an expletive out of that. I did it, right?
You did it. You did it. Congratulations. Well, Missy, it is time this week for our joy and hope. What is your joy this week?
Okay. So I think we're going to have somewhat similar things to say. So I'll mention one very quickly.
Okay.
My joy was being at our board meeting this week with our board members and our staff. It's always a joy. It's so much fun. We work with the best folks, but, and I know that's probably what you were going to say. So I'll mention another one. In spite of all this rain and the sump pumps that are running, it has made our brand new sod look amazing.
It does. It looks like Oz out there, emerald green.
Yes. So I only look out of the windows on one side of the house where the fresh sod is.
Yes.
I look out of there.
It is
I
beautiful.
don't look out the other window where you see the water collecting. So
right.
the green sod has brought me joy. So what brings you hope?
Yep. Same thing. Absolutely. We were down in Austin, Texas this week for our annual board meeting. And, sometimes in this darkness of the world that we live in, it can feel very isolating. You can feel very alone. But when good people get in a room together, you have this collective anxiety. You have this, moment of giving each other comfort. But then at the end of the meeting, there's this calling that we all feel, that we're inspired to go out and continue the work, continue fighting for freedom, inclusion, and justice for all people. And so we left Austin, Texas, very energized and inspired, and it's because of the people that we get to work with. We have an amazing group of board members and staff at Good Faith Media, and they give me hope every day.
It always just shows me the importance and the fact that God really did create us to be together. Screens are great, recordings are great, technology is great, but we were created to be in community, and that was a physical space. And that just, when great people get together, great things happen. So
absolutely,
it was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Well, we hope you find some joy and hope this week. Until next week, keep living good faith.
You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.